Yes, hello everybody and welcome to our second webinar of our webinar series Scaling Power-to-X Solutions to Financial and Market Barriers. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are based. Thank you for joining us today. I would just directly jump into the content of our webinar series, which is a joint webinar of the International PtX Hub, the PtX Lab Lausitz, and Agora Verkehrswende, ourselves. My name is Ulf Neuling. I'm the Senior Associate Fuels at Agora Verkehrswende and will lead you through today's webinar. Last week, we started our webinar series with the content or the topic Navigating Market Barriers and Financial Risks to PtX and learned about the current challenges on realizing Power-to-X projects, on market barriers, technological barriers, but also the financial aspects to get those projects up and running. Today, we will focus on existing mechanisms for financing Power-to-X projects. And last but not least, next week, we will have our third webinar, which will tackle future options on PtX finance. Today, we will have three main presentations. After Wiebke Zimmer, our Deputy Executive Director, will have a short introduction, setting the scene to cover up what was discussed last week and what is the challenge when talking about Power-to-X projects and production. Then Jan-Henrik Petersen, Managing Director at 360 Asset Finance, will give us an insight on the challenges and risks associated with private equity and private financing. Then Sebastian Dien, Program Manager, Electricity-Based Fuels at the NOW, a German-based association working on the introduction of clean energies and energy carriers in the transport sector and the energy sector, will give us an insight on a funding scheme, a German national funding scheme that was developed to promote Power-to-X projects. And last but not least, Miguesa Abera Abate, a senior transport economist at the World Bank, will give us some insights on how a developing bank like the World Bank can finance Power-to-X projects, but also other sustainable projects. After these three presentations and the introduction, of course, we will have a joint Q&A session and a discussion about what we heard and maybe the next steps to go. Before we start, maybe some housekeeping rules. So during the presentations, please turn off your microphones. It's up to you if you keep your video up and running or shut the camera down. If you have any questions to the speakers, please use the chat function. We will sort and collect all the questions and forward them to the speakers in the Q&A sessions after their presentations. Just so that you are aware, this webinar is being recorded and will, together with the slides, also be made available after the webinar on the website of the PtX Lab Lausitz. And if you might have any technical problems or challenges with Zoom with the presentations, then please just give us a notice in the chat and we will try to help you. And with that, and without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Wiebke Zimmer for a short introduction into the challenges of a targeted e-fuel market ramp-up.
Yeah, thank you, Ulf. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome from my side as well, and some words and slides, as Ulf said, for setting the scene. Why we are dealing with the topic of e-fuels? Because we have a huge emission problem in the transport sector with regard to climate protection. Here you can see the EU climate targets versus past and future trends. Blue bars are the emissions of the past. The blue dots are the member state projections, and the purple bars refer to the European Commission's core policy scenario for each sector. Especially in transport, you can see emission reduction is still a big challenge. We rather observe an increase, and even with the reductions, taking further policies into account, only a slight decrease can be reached. And that is why we talk about e-fuels as one option to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In our last webinar, we were already talking about the single production steps, so I will not go into that again. The point I would like to make is on the next slide, is once again, we have a competition between the different transport modes that might or might not need e-fuels and other sectors such as, for example, the chemical industry. Many areas of application are conceivable, but there's only limited production capacity for the foreseeable future. So e-fuels should be produced and used in a targeted manner, which means only where there's no alternative. On the next slide, I would like to illustrate this using the example of the production of e-kerosene. On the left side, you can see the anticipated global e-SAF production capacity up to 2030. On the right side, the demand according to the Refuel EU Aviation. The announcements are increasing significantly, but it will still be difficult to meet even the European quotas. In addition, from these announced projects, nothing is under construction yet, and hardly any final investment decisions have been made. So on the next slide, even some of the announced e-SAF projects have already been stopped, also those that were quite promising and involved well-known partners. Let us have a quick look on the next slide on projected ranges of e-SAF production costs. At this point in time, one must unfortunately say many studies had overly optimistic assumptions. One important reason for this is that the market ramp up and as a consequence, also the cost reductions have been significantly delayed. So to conclude, on the last slide, we will need e-fuels to advance climate protection in aviation and maritime transport, as well as in parts of the chemical industry. In road transport, direct electrification is the most efficient and most cost-effective option. Liquid fuels will be needed in aviation and maritime transport. Also, hydrogen and direct electrification will likely be part of the future energy mix in the long term. Key is to quickly ramp up the production of e-fuels, especially for aviation and maritime transport. That is why we need internationally coordinated and comprehensive sustainability criteria, clarity in the regulatory framework, because these orientation and predictability are also needed to enable the massive investments required. And that brings me to our today's topic, scoping existing mechanism for financing PowerToX. And with these words, I would like to hand over back to Ulf. Thank you.
Yes, Wiebke, thank you very much for this introduction and the overview on what we are currently dealing with in regard of Power2X market ramp up. And with that, I would like to directly hand over to our next presenter, Jan-Hendrik Pedersen, the Managing Director at 360 Asset Finance, and his presentation.
Yeah, thanks Ulf, and thanks Wiebke. Let me try to share my slides. It's probably this, hopefully. Can you see them?
Yes, now we're seeing him.
Yes.
That's perfect. So now, yeah, so thanks again and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jan-Henrik Petersen. I'm a managing director at 360 Asset Finance. And I have the pleasure to kick off today's session 2 of the PtX Lab Talk. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here. It's a great honor and great pleasure, and super important as well. Not that I'm speaking, but that we talk about this topic. I've seen I can probably skip a couple of my slides addressing actually the challenge. Wiebke already did that with her slides, but I'll just brush over them quickly. I've named my presentation before the details, breaking down the structural barriers to PtX financing. And when we talk about financing mechanisms, obviously the most prominent one and the one that's probably going to be the biggest contributor is project financing and the debt provided through project financing. And why do I say before the details in the context of PtX financing? I mean, usually in project finance, the devil is in the detail of structuring and executing the project finance transaction, while the fundamentals that are making the project viable in the first place are clear and rubber stamped. I mean, there is a range of clear and rubber stamped, but that's usually the case. And that is very often different when it comes to PtX projects. But before I delve into this in more detail, let me quickly introduce our company. 360 Asset Finance. We are strategic and financial advisors, helping project and stakeholders to achieve their goals in the green molecule space. It is an immature industry, mostly driven by regulation. So there is a need for innovative thinking, identifying and accessing potential partners, and a lot of legwork, obviously. So that is basically what we are offering. Now, the slides in a different format, but clearly saying the same as Wiebke was saying, the challenge is humongous. Just looking at SAF, so sustainable aviation fuels, as a PtX showcase, clearly outlines the task ahead of us. Only in the short run, and you know, the first table is taken from IATA from September 2024 publication, so fairly new. To be able to fulfill the SAF demand of 24 million tons per year in the year 2030 globally, you know, we have capex of 66 to 136 billion US dollar. Very wide range because it depends on a lot of different things that basically justifies this range as well. But we won't be on the low end on the super perfect case 66 billion. It's probably above 100 billion for sure. Just breaking down to looking at PtL stuff in the EU itself, driven by the mandates by the Refuel EU Aviation regulation. As Wiebke said as well, is about 600,000 tons, representing 1.2% of the fuel supply. Roughly estimated in the year 2030, 600,000 tons should come from PtL. That's about a capex of 15 to 25 billion euros. And we are already in the end of year 2024. We all know how long it takes to develop and plan and then execute such facilities. We're talking about 5 to 6 years probably. So we need to actually get to FID now on these projects so that we actually have the supply in 2030. What is the current situation? Quickly, we have 30 large-scale projects in Europe. Europe here is including the UK. None have reached final investment decision. 3/4 are just in feasibility or pre-feasibility stages. So at least 2 years away from to be operational in 2030. FID needs to be reached by 2025, latest 2026. That's not achievable for probably a lot of projects. So far, each of ESAF projects, assumed to be in advanced stages, and even that might be a little bit of a stretch, represent 300,000 tons per annum, leaving a gap of 50% to meet actually the mandate in 2030. Imports won't do it. PTL at the moment is really kind of a European thing. There's only very few projects announced outside the EU, and the status of these projects is not far developed. And as Wiebke also said, projects have been discontinued, so a lot of headwind for PtX and PTL in that sense. So why are PtX projects struggling to thrive, or more precise, what it makes it difficult for PtX project to raise financing? As I said at the beginning, before the details, usually projects using mature technologies and operating in mature and developed markets. The devil is in the detail of structure and executing the project finance. That is the heavy lifting. Not in the fundamentals actually making the project viable in the first place. And then from our perspective, there are kind of 5 fundamentals. There are the developers and sponsors. There is the technology and the pathways. There is obviously the offtake. So who am I selling to this? My product, at what price? Feedstock, how secure is it? Where do I get it from? How volatile are prices? There are interdependencies among all these 5, but obviously the first 4 drive then the financials as well, and have an impact on those. In the table below, kind of it's just comparing mature projects with PtX projects, and in these 5 categories, mature projects, before you move actually into the structure and execution phase of a project finance, you have ticked all these boxes. With PtX projects, in a lot of cases, there's a lot of barriers, obstacles, question marks, unknowns. But before I delve into that, into each of these 5 fundamentals a little bit in more detail, let's remind us of how project, the kind of industrial size PtX project kind of evolves, right? It starts with the project initiation, goes through pre-feed or feasibility, then feed, then we reach the final investment decision, then we have the EPC stage, and then the commissioning and operation. I'm just flying through this just for the sake of saving some time. From a financing perspective, there are kind of 3 high-level phases, right? The initiation phase that's needs to be financed, so the kind of the initial coming up with the initial idea, initial plan. Then we have the development expenditure phase. Everything that is actually, that's mostly equity financed, not debt financed. The debt financing really comes in the CapEx phase, being arranged, kind of prior FID, and that is actually where then the heavy lifting has to be done. I have slides for all of the 3 phases, and I'm going to put them at the end of the presentation. The presentation is going to be made public, I think, on the web page. If not, just drop me a line or give me a shout. I'll send it to you. When I talk about project finance, then that is directly at the CapEx phase. The DevEx phase already is a struggle for a lot of projects to get financed because there is no debt. It's going to be equity. And if you think about the size of these projects, we talk about probably $1 billion to $2 billion overall cost. Then and you think about whatever 5%, 10% is DevEx, has to be spent in DevEx phase, and you talk about 2-digit or even 3-digit amount of spending in the DevEx phase already. Yeah, just to actually position what comes next. Project finance, a quick definition. I've put them down here. You can read them later or Google it. The important thing to know here when it comes to project financing is that the project financier, the banks, the lenders, rely solely on the project being able to generate consistently and hopefully predictably cash flow so that the debt can be serviced. And it's not only debt servicing; the equity holder want a return as well. So it's really kind of the cost of capital. Now let's go through the 5 categories, right? And you know, what are the requirements and where are the obstacles, really, right? Developer and sponsors, I only have requirements. Because you know that's very diverse across the space and across the projects. But clearly, you know, the developer, you know, needs to show, you know, technical experience, a track record, you know, knowledge about regulatory and permitting affairs, right? Stakeholder relationships to all the suppliers of goods and technology. Then obviously it needs to be a clear risk mitigation plan in place, also to demonstrate that you know that the developer has, you know, has is hands-on basically in terms of the project. Transparency and governance it needs to be a given anyway. Sponsors, you know, again, you know, we talk about capex of 1 to 2 billion, let's say. And if you have a debt to equity ratio here, I don't know, 60 to 75%, we talk about hundreds of millions that in equity needs to be contributed. So the equity contribution, you know, the sponsor needs to have kind of deep pockets, right? And the ability to contribute sufficient equity, but also to have enough capital reserves for contingencies. Important to have a long-term vision. So the support needs to be, you know, not just for the initial phase, but you know, for a long time, right, into at least into a full load production. Needs to have a reputation and a credibility and track record. So needs to show that he has supported projects in the past. Needs to be willing to share risks, right? That are, you know, coming with these. And again, you know, and coming to this now, we talk about first of a kind project. So the involvement needs to be really strong and deep. Now, technology-wise, so what are the PtX technological challenges? You know, looking from a financial or financing perspective, the key challenge, as I said, is it is a first of a kind, you know, characteristic. So it hasn't been done before. Banks haven't financed this before. They have they have nowhere to look for kind of examples or you know, mitigations or experience. So that is clearly kind of a big barrier and a big obstacle. There are certain mitigation strategies to it. I don't want to, you know, again, for time's sake, I don't want to dive in too deeply into this. I have a distinction between kind of public sector intervention needed or you know, possible actually to mitigate these type of risks, and that is basically in italic and the kind of the lighter green color. And then, you know, the others on what can be done kind of on project level, right? On individual project level in terms of mitigants. There's also the risk of obviously combining multiple emerging technologies, especially if you look at sustainable aviation fuels. You know, there's a long range of technologies that need to be implemented and combined. Hasn't been done before in totality. Obviously raising, you know, the complexity and therefore the probability of delays, cost overruns, and failure. Also, you know, there is, in terms of operation maintenance, you know, nobody really knows. In terms of costs that might appear throughout the project, very low visibility. Just in stress again, regulatory, and because you know a lot of discussions around this space is around regulation, which is super critical and super important, and is not as supportive as, you know, hoped for, or and needs adjustment. So, you know, regulation clearly is a major driver here in terms of, you know, increasing risks or increasing the barriers of getting these projects off the ground and financed, or reducing it. And that's for technology already a thing. So just to give you kind of a profile of the risk profile of a PtX production project, right? You have down here all the phases, initiation to commissioning. Then on the left you have the project risk, and on the right you have cumulative cost. Cumulative cost is the yellow line, and the other one is the dark green line. And you see that the risk stays elevated right into the commissioning and operation phase, because only then you will know that actually what we hope for is can be realized and is being realized. While the costs basically are already spent, right? The money is already spent at that point, right? Which obviously is a difficult risk profile, risk return profile, if you like, or risk cost profile. Mature and established process look more like this red line, right? You take a lot of risk away, during before FID basically, and then obviously there is remaining risk in terms of construction and overruns and delays and stuff. But a lot of the risk are mitigated by that point, and this is more a profile a project finance banker would like to see. Now we have looked at the sponsors, we have looked at technology. Now looking at the offtake challenges. So the key challenge here obviously is to procure long-term offtake agreements with stable counterparties covering the levelized cost of production. And the challenge here with PtX is that we have a price premium, right? So the price for PtX and Wiebke kind of she mentioned that as well, is significantly higher than the conventional fuels we have, the fossil fuels. I do not see these costs coming down as promised by a lot of studies years ago. Not at all. I mean, you have to imagine a project has to run about for 20 years, right, to pay back basically and make a return. So within the project it's not that simple actually to achieve efficiency gains, right? Or which means then obviously you have to learn from each project and then obviously develop a new project, right? That benefits from the knowledge gained. In my perspective, that's going to take a lot longer than what was suggested. So then you have contract durations, like off-takers' reluctance to commit to long-term contracts. We if you want to raise project finance, right, then there needs to be kind of a match, more or less a match, or kind of a mitigated mismatch between your off-take and the financing period. Because again, it is a revenue stream actually that guarantees that the project can be and the financing can be repaid. In terms of sustainable aviation fuels, it is the aviation industry, and at the moment, the way they procure their fuels is it's an on spot market. So they call up probably Shell or BP and say next week I need 100,000 tons at Frankfurt Airport. How much going to cost me? For them to agree to kind of to commit to like 15 or 20 years taking a fuel at a much higher price than they used to is a big ask, and it goes to the core of how these companies operate and are structured. Pricing structure, price volatility. We have counterparty risk, obviously. If you have one off taker, right, and then it goes bust, there's a problem. There's only nascent market demand. It's again, it's very policy driven. There's no liquid or mature, market or trading in these yet. It's going to take a while actually to get there. And then regulations again. There is in terms of there's some uncertainty and ambiguity around regulations on the offtake side, right? We have the Refuel EU aviation regulation that demands for SAF to be applied. But there's also kind of an Article 7T, which is the review clause, that kind of says, in a couple of years' times, we have a look and see if it worked. So there's a concern actually that the mandates are being rolled back, right? Which obviously would have a big impact on offtake and demand. Now, feedstock challenge. Here's the key challenge: that to have a stable long-term supply of feedstocks that meet regulatory requirements. PTL is so it's hydrogen and a CO2 source. On both fronts, we have regulations actually that are difficult or turned out to be more difficult than probably supportive. So that is again a major concern. But in any case, right? Again, we talk about 15 to 20 years. You need to have uninterrupted supply of these feedstocks to run your facility and to produce the product. That is, that's again, the feedstock markets are immature as well, and diverse in one way and not diverse in the other way. There's a lot of cost volatility that can be expected. Again, contract duration might have a mismatch to offtake and to the financing. Sustainability compliance regulations, again, in terms of what is sustainable and what's not, and according to regulations, that has changed, and there is the concern again that this might change over time. It seems at the moment that things like grandfathering rights are not on the table at the moment. Yeah, and then obviously supply chain dependencies and counterparty risks we have here as well as a challenge. So now all these four drive financials and the financials, and the key challenge again, translating what for translating this for project finance is that the project needs to demonstrate a long-term stable and predictable cash flow profile. It's sufficiently robust for project finance lenders and sponsors. And to achieve that, right, you need a strong sponsorship and a equity commitment. You need bankable, hopefully or preferably diversified revenue streams, a robust feedstock supply chain, and a transparent and conservative financial modeling. So transparent and conservative means comprehensible and really being able to show that these projects are viable below full load and full capacity. Because these things will be stressed back and forwards by banks and the analysts, just to see where potential weaknesses are. Projects need to have adequate risk mitigation contingency strategies, a smart technological project design, experience and development management team, and alignment with long-term regulations and policies. And so yeah, I mean, for the sake of time, let me quickly summarize this. So again, this table. There are barriers. There's a lot of barriers, but a lot of them also, they're also mitigating factors. And I don't want to give the impression that this is unachievable. It's absolutely not, right? And that's what I'm trying to say. Each project is unique, right, and should be assessed and structured on its own merits. I have seen a lot of projects who work, no issue. Often, there are tailored solutions available for individual projects to mitigate the risk profile. I've also seen that. But obviously, to achieve a broad-based and accelerated PtX market ramp up, the public sector, right, needs to up their game, and needs to come up with deeper and further interventions that actually support a market ramp up here. With that, and sorry for running through these slides so quickly. It's very hard actually to talk about this in 20 minutes, but that's let me finish here, and I say thank you, and I think questions are coming, or you can ask questions, or the questions will be answered after all presentations have been done. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Jan-Henrik, for this very, very comprehensive overview. I think we heard a lot about challenges and risks, and I think it's also a challenge, as you mentioned, to give such an holistic overview on project financing in like 20 minutes, but you did a perfect job on that.
Thank you.
So I think it was a very, very good opening presentation for this session. And yeah, with that, I would like to hand over to Sebastian, who will then continue and builds up on this fundamental on project finance.
Thank you very much, Ulf. Let me just put up my slides. There you go. Up. There. Now, can you see my first slide?
Yeah.
No. So with that, a very warm welcome also from my side. My name is Sebastian Dien, and I'm going to talk about funding instruments for PtX products with a special focus on power to liquid kerosene, or ESAF as it is called. With that, let's just have a look at my agenda. First, of course, I have to talk about who we are as a company and what we stand for. And then I will briefly dip into the European funding mechanisms most known, to then focus up most of my time on the PtL funding mechanism, which is a mechanism to fund power to liquid kerosene, which we developed for the Ministry of Digital and Transport in Germany. We did actually twice, but you might understand what I mean by that at the end of my presentation. And if there's time at the end, I would also like to dip into the SIF monitor, which is one of our products that displays actually the market ramp up of globally of SIF, and also the current project statuses. With that, who are we? The NOW GmbH is actually a completely state-owned company, which solely works for the federal ministries, and our mission is climate neutral transport sector. Given that we mainly work for the German Federal Ministry for Digital and Transport, we have several topics that we're working in, such as charging infrastructure, hydrogen mobility, and in my case, I'm working in the renewable fuels division, and this is basically our mandate to work on such things as policy advising, helping the government with strategic processes, and also, and that's why I'm here today, developing, monitoring, and evaluating funding programs. So let's head into it. European funding mechanisms. Now, what am I talking about when I say funding mechanism? It's not like the regulatory general framework to support the market ramp-ups, such as quotas, or even like a tax incentive, such as the IRA. There are mainly, I would say, the four left ones might be ones that you know in Europe. As for me, I'm talking about a lot about the European perspective, so forgive me if I missed out major ones that are otherwise available globally. The IPSI projects are rather big European projects of common European interest, which are funded by state money and just get like a general exception from state aid rules of the European Commission. And we see that they are very big, let's say they took a long time to get started, but they are now getting realized, and we will see some ramp up of especially such things as electrolysis capacity there. Saying that as well, the Hydrogen Bank, the European Hydrogen Bank, is actually European money that is meant to especially focus on the hydrogen ramp up and the production of hydrogen. And we had the first call for that successful this year. We saw a lot of projects being funded there. But we already even saw projects that were funded and had a drawback, such as the Ørsted plant for PtX methanol in Finland. So even if somebody receives funding, it doesn't say they will go all the way. Given that, we go a bit further to such things such as H2 Global, which were specifically designed to tackle things such as uncertainty for the long run, and with a double auction mechanism. I will not head into that much further, since I will talk about it in my PTL Cairo, which is actually an adjacent program, which we developed partly together with the HINCO and the H2 Global Foundation. And then the UK also introduced a set revenue mechanism, funding mechanism that is basically like a feed-in tariff. So with that, as I said, my specialty is PTI Cairo. Some of you might have heard of it, some not. In opposite to the other ones, it's a German-based thing that's also meant for German production. And but right now it has the, let's say, mechanics that are very adjacent to H2 Global. So you might have seen some of my slides already, or parts of them, when you heard about H2 Global. But I will try to get into a bit deeper at some points to highlight some of the mechanics. With that, let's go to PTL Cairo. So thanks to Jan-Hendrik Petersen, I don't have to really talk about that slide much anymore. Just the one thing I want to highlight is, of course, the funding does not only have nowadays the duty to say, okay, close the financial gap, but also to give prospects of security and deliver exactly that risk mitigation. That's why a lot of these modern funding programs, such as H2 Global, look very different from old CapEx fundings that we saw back in the last decades. And what is PTL Cairo? PTL Cairo is a program that is meant to ramp up the industrial production of power to liquid kerosene, or ESAF, as it may be called by others. And it's meant to produce in Germany at a large scale. So we are talking 10,000 tons and up. And the grant decision is made via competitive bidding. I will go into that a bit later, deeper later. I don't think I have to introduce the power to liquid process for kerosene here anymore, since we are already in the second session of this webinar. But just real quick, I mean, there are different pathways, and of course, the synthesis could be a Fischer-Tropsch or a methanol synthesis. At the end, we don't really care. We just want the kerosene. So our goal is clear. Let's talk about the status. So one of the reasons that most of you, or some of you, might not have heard of this program, despite that it had quite a significant funding of between, I think, 1.4 billion euros for a certain period of time, is that we are right now on hold. Let's put it that way. We had a phase one where we developed a first mechanism that was based on the bidding for the minimum financial gap, basically, I call it. I will go also into that a bit deeper. We did a market testing on that, which we received a lot of feedback in 2021. And we actually sat down with the results and had to say, okay, we have to change something, because this first mechanism had some major drawbacks with the risk distribution, and we got pretty clear feedback that we should alter the funding mechanism, which then we did. And we talked to H2 Global, and they offered us to help us develop an H2 Global adjacent funding mechanism, which we then brought to the European Union for pre-notification. And we had quite successful talks that sadly took some time. And in that time, we had some major budget cuts. So we are currently waiting to get new budgets to get the program back up and running, but we are quite far concerning the development of the mechanism itself and our discussion with the European Union to get its state aid notified. The subject of funding is, as I said, production of the fuel in Germany, but imports of the intermediate products are possible and even wanted. I will go to that later a bit further. We have a funding through a subsidy per energy content of the produced product. I mean, this is in this case power to liquid kerosene, but if you want to fund something else, such as methane, methanol, ammoniac, whatever, of course you can translate that. The grant, I might to be determined in a competitive bidding procedure that is very clear by itself, and we have a minimum plant size of 10,000 tons per year. Now, when I say minimum plant size, we figured out that this might be the minimum size where you can say it's a semi-industrial scale that will actually mean something in terms of technology demonstration and proving the technology, but of course, projects were allowed to go higher given the amount of funding available. So we saw a lot of projects that proposed us with higher production rates. And the funding period is and was always planned for 10 years, which is the main idea to cover the offtake side a bit and reduce the risk uncertainties of the PtX projects just addressed. And the main criteria, since we're based in Germany, is that the PTL produced is aligned with the RFNBO criteria of the European Union, the renewable fuels of non-biological origin. And that was and is still quite an issue, as you can see, for programs such as H2 Global that had quite a tough time finding bidders or even, let's say, successful bidders that can provide these fuels with these criteria. But it is something we must stand to as a European-based country. Now, when I said imports are welcome, I have to have a look at the production process. And it is basically the left side is what we consider as import. And now if I put an overlay on this, it is basically the intermediaries such as methanol or hydrogen itself, or even like maybe as a derivative that is cracked then here for further production. And with the idea that, of course, large-scale production of power to liquid in Germany is very challenging due to the local, how you say, Standortfaktoren. Okay, anyways, so it's rather challenging compared to putting it in the desert in the MENA region. And so we kind of saw it as the oil industry is working today, where you have refineries in Germany that work with crude oil imported from all over the place. And but at the same time, of course, as a national state, we have an interest in sourcing local expertise, securing such things as technology leadership, etc. So there was a high interest to get like, let's say, production sites in Germany with these top-of-the-art technologies. So that's just the scope. Go now for the first design. As I mentioned, we had two designs. We did this twice. The first design was mainly supported by Frontier Economics, and we introduced first a design that was based on a maximum required contribution margin in euro per gigajoule. Now that sounds complicated. Basically, it's the idea that you will get all the money you need to cover your costs. So that does not include such things as large margins for the investors, but at least you will get out with net zero in there. It's a bit like a CFD, but a bit more simplified in this case. A contract for difference, sorry. Now we had some restrictions due to the state budget code, where you can say If you're bidding for a maximum required contribution margin, that is the top maximum you can get. If you have a year, I'll try to depict this down here. If you have a year where you have deficient revenues for the reason of high production costs or low sales of the fuel, you will still just get this maximum that you bid for, and there's no adjustment of the money that you will get in future periods. If you have a period, accounting period, where you have excess revenues, for that period, you still get the full money, but at the end, you have to repay the government body with the excess that you got. And at the same time, the paid funding for the next accounting period will be reduced. If in that period, again, you will have deficient revenues, you can get repaid up to the maximum of the original maximum required contribution margin, but it will never go above that, never, even if you overall in the project make losses. Now, why did we do this? It was not very our choice to make it that restrictive. It was mostly due to the reading of the national budget code that we had to design it in such a way. Otherwise, we would have liked to see it work a bit more like a contract for difference. But you could be less strict on your design with these if you had a different budget code for your country. So I would still recommend this kind of funding design, if maybe with a bit few details that are less restrictive. That said, we did the market tests. We had some things such as penalties for non-fulfillment, of course, and we got feedback. The whole funding mechanism is pretty detailed, published, sadly only in German language, but on the link below here you can find the published version. It's a PDF document that's online and displays the whole mechanism as it is intended to work. Feel free to look at that. We received feedback on that, which was on the one side very positive and the other side rather negative. Now, let me see. So the positive thing was that we had a high interest even for a production in Germany, which was at that time, 2021, we had there was a peak of interest in power to liquid, let's put it that way, and there were even projects in Germany that were, let's say, sought through very much. We had more than 10 potential projects with a capacity of more than 20 petajoule per year that were pitched to us in this market testing phase. But most of the feedback we also got was that the asymmetric risk distribution and the current funding mechanism could be a showstopper. So even if we have this long funding period of 10 years, if you don't bid high enough on your initial bid for the maximum coverage, you will get stuck with a lot of risk for losses throughout the project. And so we got the feedback that a clear contracts for difference like mechanism would be favored and more bankable. Taking that back home, we did some of our homework and we came in contact with H2 Global. We worked with them and decided that this might be the way to go for us. I will just introduce this double auction mechanism real quick of H2 Global, where you have a competitive-based procurement process for a purchase agreement, where the highest bidder or the lowest bidder, let's put it that way, gets a purchase agreement for their product. This agreement is made with an intermediary, in this case, the HINCO. You can have several of these depending on your budget, but the idea, let's just focus on one, is just you have one long-term purchase agreement for your desired product, and then you introduce several short-term sales agreements that are also given out in a competitive sales pitch. And the best bidder, the highest bidder in this case, will get the sales agreement. And of course, there probably is going to be a difference between what you get from the purchase agreement and from the sales agreement. And this difference is basically what the state is compensating to Hinco in the moment that the difference is due. So this mechanism has quite some advantages. I will talk about a bit about the ups and downsides in the next slides. So I try to depict the timeline of the purchase and sales agreements. So as said, the purchase agreements is usually a long term. You try to go as long as possible to secure the producers with an easy offtake option for their project. And I mean, power to liquid projects have amortization times of roughly 20 years, so 10 years is still a bit short, which is one of the feedbacks that H2 Global got for their first tendering rounds. But I think 10 years is basically pretty much the maximum you can do as a state for funding in terms of budget code. So what do you have to do first? First, you reserve the funding budget. Let's say in this case, we do a 300 million budget. This budget will cover your total purchase agreement. So all the kerosene in this case, the eSAF that we are buying in, is covered in this reserved funding budget. So of course, the funding in time has to be reserved earlier, but it will come into play at the same time as the purchase agreement. Now, if you have the purchase agreement in place, you can start putting out your sales agreements. Of course, these will be made after you have purchased something, so you know what you're selling, but you try to get them aligned in a way that there will always be coverage for your purchases in terms of sales. Now, on the y-axis, you see money, not the amount of fuel produced. So, of course, the fuel produced and purchased has to be always a fuel that you always also sell, but you will get different revenues depending on the market situation. And now where the budget comes into play, the funding is actually just this red gap here, where you see that the actual funding required at the end is much less than the reserved funding budget at the beginning. So when we have announcements for H2 Global handing out 900 million funding, or having a budget for 900 million funding, they might not use all of that at the end. And this can be even lessened if you have, for example, a sales agreement that goes above your purchase agreement. So if we have high prices, which is one of the reasons why you try to have short-term sales, so you can ride the waves of the market in your favor. Now, in this case, you will have a repayment to the state, which does not really hurt the intermediary because they're not depending on that or making money on that anyways, but it further lowers your actually funding demand. So now here's the con. So you have a high budget reservation upfront that is required, but will most likely never be completely used up. So if you have issues with let's say a budget in your government body where it's tough to secure such funding budgets, that might be a drawback. But if you communicate it correctly, you might be able to say, okay, we actually have we have pretty sure assumptions for our revenues. On the other hand, you don't have to go in all the way with the eSAF price, which we don't know yet for sure, but you can at least say, okay, we have a market price for fossil kerosene, maybe with a tiny green premium on top. And you take that as a baseline for all your sales agreements, as a virtual baseline. So as you can see, what I did here, the reserved funding up front is going down as you say, okay, we will have revenues that that will be coming out of the sales agreement. Okay, so I hope that was understandable. If not, just direct some questions to me and I will try to elaborate further. But basically, this is the timeline of the H2 Global funding mechanism, and I really like this mechanism because it has on the pro side a high funding efficiency. You will really only pay what you need as you are on both sides the auctioneer. You have the bidding procedure on the sales and on the purchase sides. And you will also get the advantage, which is not to be underestimated, that you are creating a transparent market price for the sold product, in this case, ESAF. Now, if you try to get a market price for, let's say, regular SAF, that is quite a challenge. I mean, you can buy these things from certain platforms, but you will never be allowed to publicate this and even talk freely about the prices that you paid. So getting out these prices in the open is a huge advantage in terms of free market development. Even in the interest of the funding state not overpaying for their product. And of course, you will have a risk distribution that is better suited for funding than what I presented before, at least if you have to put on these conditions that I did there. So now let's say, why did I talk about power to liquid on H2 Global? Of course, I am not from the HINCO, so I had to talk about PtX Aero, but there are some differences as well. Now we are looking at national production versus international production outside of the European Union. And we're looking at the import of raw materials versus total import scenario. Also, we are looking at the sales at the factory gate versus like the import, the fuel delivery to EU ports as with H2 Global, and we purely purchase ESAF, whereas H2 Global also had an ESAF window, which was not successful, but has several windows for different H2 derivatives. Now, why am I highlighting this? Well, H2 Global had some struggle to find bidders. And this is also due to the fact that they're producing outside of the European Union to bring the product into the European Union. We heard before that there are quite a few challenges with regulatory framework, and some of them can be bypassed with the local in-Europe production. Some others cannot be, but still, we would be hopeful that in PtX Aero, ESAF procurement would still be feasible if we get funding budget. So that being said, what are challenges for funding programs? Okay, this will be my last slide, I heard. So just as I said, legal framework, we have the state aid rules, which are, especially in the European context, quite challenging to get out something running. You have capacity problems. I mean, we are supporting the government to create these funding mechanisms. But on the other hand, you have to talk to the European Commission, which is known to be quite busy on the many fronts, and you have, you don't have always the personnel you need to get these things running fast. Then you have the market security. Of course, nobody knows what's expected. And with that, I would go to the SIF monitor. Ulf, allow me please to just go real quick and say, okay, we have this. It's a great product. And look, check it out. It has a quite detailed disperse of different technologies and the ramp up of e-fuels. We have a map that displays all the projects that we know about worldwide. And I don't fix that, but we have a query also going on that is being sent out to all the projects since we want to update our project, the SIF monitors. So if you are working for a project or know somebody who's working for an ESAF or a SAF project, please send them forward to us, and we'll hand out this project update. All right. Thank you very much. This is some resources we also gathered. And with that, that's me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview. Although I'm not an expert in developing funding schemes, funding mechanisms, the PtX Aero still sounds very well thought and well developed, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it's a pity that it's not gone into operation due to the budgetary restrictions, but I think it might also be a blueprint for other funding schemes, for other regions, other countries to develop funding mechanisms that are pretty alike or similar to that of developing or fostering the market ramp-up of PtX products and e-fuels. And with that, we come to our last speaker, Megesa from the World Bank, who's a senior transport economist, and he will give us some insights on ESAF, but also SAF financing from the perspective of a development bank. So, please.
Hi, everyone. I hope you see my slides.
Yeah, it's not in the presentation mode yet, but yes, perfect. Now we see them in the full screen.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Megesa Abad. I'm a senior transport economist, and I co-lead the aviation knowledge area at the World Bank. I sit in the Washington, D.C. office in the Global Transport and Expertise Unit. In this presentation, I will talk about sustainable aviation fuels, developing economies, and then I draw some insights from our ongoing work in Africa. I try to cover 3 topics in my presentation. I'll just briefly maybe talk about aviation at the World Bank, and then I will talk about existing World Bank lending instruments that are relevant to the topic we have here. And then, as I said, I'll then draw some insights from our ongoing activities on SAF coming from Africa. I'm an aviation economist, so I always like to start with the market. If you have recently looked at the aviation market, after 4 years, global aviation is back to its pre-pandemic levels. Supply and demand are matching well, leading to historic load factor levels, revenue passenger kilometer available, seat kilometers. These are measures of supply and demand. And then they are aligning very well. So some of you, if you are wondering why your recent flights were really packed, it's because of data like this. The industry is back to its historic level of growth. With this, obviously, the question of sustainability and all of that comes to question, right? That's why I always like to look at the market. But from the bank side, we have always been active since our inception, really, in this space. We provide support to the whole part of the aviation value chain. In fact, the first few loans of the World Bank went to supporting KLM and Air France when the bank was actually started back in the 50s, right? And then over time, our support sort of evolved. In the 70s and 80s, standalone airport infrastructure projects were very common in developing countries. And in the 90s, we sort of also went to provide policy advice, some capacity building, liberalization of markets, privatization of carriers, and supporting civil aviation authorities in their regulatory oversight activities. Currently, it's a well-diversified portfolio supporting the private sector through our private sector arm, IFC, and also some guarantees through MIGA. And I'll talk about that in the next slide here. All parts of the World Bank group are active in the aviation space. Our current active portfolio is about $1.5 billion. IFC has around 11 active operations in its investment portfolio, and also has an advisory mandate where it provides transaction advisory services in about 6 different contexts. IBRD is the International Bank of Reconstruction Development, where I sit. We do also have several projects all over the world, from the Pacific Islands to Caribbean Islands, and a couple of projects in Africa as well. MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, also provides guarantee services. The most recent ones were in Jordan and Madagascar. Let me now talk briefly about various lending instruments. I'm not quite sure about the audiences. Some of this information is maybe something you very much know, but for others it could be relevant. So I thought would be maybe useful to talk about how the bank really works. Typically, we have three types of lending instruments. Investment project financing. This is very typical for transport sector projects where I sit. We do also have development policy financing. This is direct budgetary support for countries, conditional on policy reforms. We do also have another instrument called Program for Results, or P4R. This links directly to the delivery of defined results by our client countries. They come to us with a very specific reform programs in a specific sector, and the lending then will disperse according to achievement of these specified results. We do also provide grants and technical assistance to prepare and implement projects. I put here 4 key initiatives in the sustainable energy and climate action area. We've got what we call Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, or SMAP, which supports renewable energy and energy efficiency projects in our client countries. This is a multi-donor trust fund supporting project preparation and sometimes directly also our clients. We do also have the Climate Investment Funds, which combines the Clean Technology Fund and Strategic Climate Fund. This sits with the bank, but supports pretty much all multilateral development agencies together with clients. And currently they have a call out, which also includes a call for development of green fuels for the maritime sector. So you might want to check out their website to see how one is able to develop a project. This has to be initiated by a client country, and then together with a development bank. The bank also hosts the Global Environment Facility Trust Fund. This is again a multi-donor trust fund, which all MDBs have access to. Finally, I also put Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, GFDT for short. That sits with the unit I work in. This is a new initiative came in the last 2 years. It's meant directly to decarbonize the transport sector. Again, a multi-donor trust fund, and initial funders actually include Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and the UK. And there are other countries joining and putting money into it. This is purely a bank executed trust fund. That means World Bank staff has access to this money to support our client countries in project development. We are also driving global green hydrogen development. You might have seen some of these projects announced. We've got big projects in India, Chile, and Brazil of different magnitude, and we've used different lending instruments. The India one is an interesting one. It's a development policy financing or development policy law. The money is directly going to government coffers, but it's meant to reduce production cost and facilitate renewable energy transmission and create a national carbon credit market. And some of it also goes to scaling up green hydrogen in India. In Chile, the lending instrument was a blended finance and concessional financing, pulling together a lot of resources from various development agencies, interestingly including KfW here, which it might be interesting to some of you here. In Brazil, it's an interesting instrument where the bank provides financing to public development banks in Brazil to act as a financial intermediary and then those banks then on lend to project developers in Brazil. Now I go to maybe what I work directly in ongoing SAF activities in Africa. A couple of years ago, we published a flagship report on the role of sustainable aviation fuel in developing countries. This was a work done with Professor Robert Malina and other colleagues, where we really looked at options to decarbonize aviation, and we found out that SAF production will have to be a core part of decarbonizing aviation. This is not new, really. This was what everybody was saying at the same time. But we also looked at what the production landscape looks like. And obviously, we found out that most of the SAF production plants are dominated by OECD locations. Most of our client countries are missing in the action. And in fact, they risk to be left out of this new energy transition. To the very least, maybe they might be exporters of raw material to OECD countries, and then they might even end up importing more expensive fuels to be able to decarbonize their sector. I don't want to labor this point, but this is the option the aviation sector has in terms of decarbonizing itself. A few weeks ago, IATA published what the SAF market will look like in the coming 25 years. As you can see, conventional fuel will still play a great role in the coming 15 years. If anything, if we were to have SAF in the market, it will be mainly bio-SAF, biogenic SAF, and e-SAF will only play some role in the 40s. And then by 2050, according to IATA's estimate, hopefully we will have some 35% of global jet fuel demand covered by SAF PTL, the one Sebastian was talking about earlier. But as I said earlier, current SAF production plants are dominated by OECD locations. This map is not meant to be read. Just to point out that Africa, for example, is completely missing out, except this one SAF plant in the plants in South Africa by Sasol. Sebastian's map also showed this earlier, right? But other than that, we are not really looking at many OECD locations in terms of SAF production for obvious reasons, right? These are new technology, very expensive to produce. So after our flagship report, we sort of started to do two things. The first one was we developed a SAF investment decision-making framework. This is a work we're doing right now with colleagues at the bank. And in Africa specifically, we looked at three things. We looked at all countries in terms of their supply potential, looking at their feedstock and refinery distribution capacity. We also looked at demand in terms of jet fuel demand in those countries at a route level. Also assess the policy readiness of countries to look at whether they have a SAF mandate or some kind of policy when it comes to renewable fuels. I'm not going to take you through each of these three different pillars, but I would like to point out one of the pillars, which is the supply side. If you look at the African continent, it has a very limited refinery and fuel logistics capacity. This is despite Africa being a very big continent and also a continent where a lot of crude is produced and supplied to the rest of the world. On the left side, you see the map of the pipeline system, refinery locations, and then the jet fuel production capacity of some of these refineries. And then very few countries produce and refine jet in the continent, the main one obviously being South Africa, and Angola, Algeria, and most recently Nigeria also has started refining jet and exporting it to the European markets. On the right-hand side, this is a data coming from IATA. They looked at global refining capacity. Africa again plays very small role and continues to do so even in the 2050s, right? Most of the world's refining capacity will still be in the Asian market. So looking at those three pillars I mentioned earlier for our investment decision-making framework, we sort of classified African countries into three groups. We found 9 lead countries in terms of their ability to be able to produce SAF right now. And a vast majority of countries are in the low contributors box because they don't have the right policy environment or the right supply logistics or enough jet fuel demand or aviation market to be able to support local production of SAF. We also found a few countries, we call them value chain countries, which have maybe a sufficient level of feedstock production capacity, and then if they could integrate with the lead countries, they can play a somewhat meaningful role in the SAF production of this country, in the continent. The second work we are doing on SAF is a country deep dive study. These are techno-economic studies. We selected 4 countries out of the lead countries. These are Ethiopia, South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya. We looked at different feedstocks and technology pathways in these countries. In Ethiopia, we're looking at 2 feedstocks, municipal solid waste and molasses for the alcohol to jet production pathway. In Kenya, we're looking at the HEFA pathway, which is the currently commercialized SAF. And there we're looking at UCO, used cooking oil, and castor oil for our analysis. In South Africa, we are looking at PTM, and given the country's long-standing ability and technological know-how, we thought this would be something where it might be feasible to produce SAF. Nigeria, we're looking at the pathway for co-processing, given their historic capacity to refine fuel and existing refining capacity. The co-processing pathway would make sense. That we are finalizing the techno-economic analysis for that. I don't have time to go to all of this analysis, but I took one output from our Kenya work. This is the work we are doing with Professor Robert Malina and his research team. This is a result showing the minimum fuel selling price for a hypothetical HEFA plant in Kenya, right? The current conventional jet fuel price is around 169 Kenyan shillings per liter. But if you were to produce SAF in that country, this will be almost twice the amount of that. So one needs to close a green premium, right? And this green premium could be closed through 2 means. First one needs to close the risk gap through offtake agreements, loan guarantees, capital subsidies, concessional financing, or some kind of uplift mandates. But that will not take you to the conventional fuel price level. You still need to close the cost gap. This will need to involve maybe some kind of technological innovation, and then also some lower cost of hydrogen if you were to produce that locally. And then also you can use other market mechanisms if you price carbon properly. or provide some kind of fuel credits, and then that price gap will be closed. And so we do all this kind of analysis in all of these 4 countries to make local SAF production feasible. So this is what we are working on. And I stop here and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Megesa, for these insights and taking us on a more global view, and also again a focus on the African continent and your work over there. I think it was a very, very good addition to the more specific topics on project finance and the German funding scheme we had before. So unfortunately, we don't have that much time left, but I would like to use the opportunity to at least forward one question to each of you, and then close with a like more overarching questions to all of you together. So maybe, yes, as you have been the last one speaking, I will start with you again. So the SAF investment decision-making framework you present to us, I think it's very interesting. Does this framework already include ESAF, or is it also taking ESAF into consideration? And if not, could there be a lever to support ESAF production also on the African continent, as at least in the German and European discussion, Africa is always mentioned as one of very promising regions, although it's a very big region, to produce ESAF just by the numbers.
Yes, we looked at countries' renewable electricity production capacity. So in that way, we sort of took care of the ESAF potential of countries, right? For me, and obviously at the end of the day, green hydrogen is down to countries' ability to produce cheap electricity, and many of African countries have hydro capacity, and that really is maybe the key part of that. But we didn't really directly look at ESAF per se, but somewhat indirectly we accounted for that.
Yeah, just a short follow-up. Is that something you or your colleagues intend to include or focus more in the years to come?
So I should mention our maritime colleagues. They are very much active in the e-fuels space, and a couple of years ago, actually, they ranked countries globally, not only Africa, but globally, looking at countries' maritime fuel production capacity. In their index, the way they constructed their composite index, they actually looked at pretty much all countries in the world. So maybe one could look at that one. But for us, at the moment, the commercially available SAF and where our countries, our clients are maybe realistically be able to join the value chains in this space, right? And they have the feedstock that they could produce sustainably, obviously, and then be able to join the market. But for me, again, the green hydrogen story comes in, even with the bio-SAF, one needs to have hydrogen in the production process, right? And when it comes to certification, in fact, many of the SAF producers tell me that, okay, that's where they can lower their carbon intensity score if they were to use more sustainable green hydrogen. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Also, with that, you also covered, at least tackled another question on the hybrid process that was mentioned in the chat. So, perfect answer. Thank you very much. And just a short question to Sebastian, that was also asked in the chat. When do you expect the sales prices being higher than the purchase prices as you presented? I think it's hard to guess for now, but maybe you have a rough estimation. And what do you think will be, or when do you think will be the most money needed to fund your scheme such as you presented?
Yeah, I think I will start with the second one. The beauty of it is that you're paying per amount of fuel produced. So the total amount of subsidies should be spread out quite good over the amount of the funding period. I mean, you have to block it into your budget, but it will be paid out over the course of the purchase agreement. Of course, you might have something where producers say, okay, we have a ramp up. So you have different steps of a plant going into production, or somebody who's not as confident saying, okay, we're going in with a 100 production the first years. We're just going 60, 70, 80%. I don't know. So you might have lower subsidies that you have to hand out there, but that varies, and I wouldn't say that's like typical for the funding program or for the funding mechanism. I'm of course talking now about the second mechanism, that's the H2 global adjacent one, and also looking at that, I mean, that plays into the other question as well. When do we expect to get subsidies back? I'm not sure if I expect that really. It's just I was trying to display that it could be possible to further decrease the funding demand. I mean, some might say, okay, especially in the first years, you might have high prices when the refuel EU aviation quotas are setting in with their draconic penalty system. You might even get a peak when you don't have enough production for power to liquid kerosene, for example. But I don't want to do these predictions. So I would say generally quite spread out. And the other thing is just a hypothesis.
Perfect. Thanks again. And although time is already run up, I just don't want to release Jan Henrik without raising another question to him. So, as you mentioned, many of the challenges and risks that have to be overcome to raise proper finance for PtX projects. What do you think is needed the most to overcome these challenges? So, what would be one of the biggest levers to realize proper finance for such projects?
There is no one single lever, I would say. It is the combination of all. And again, there are to a lot of these things there are mitigating factors, and I think there are workarounds, and there are banks can accept mismatches to a certain extent, like maturity mismatches. But again, what needs to be shown is that there is a predictable revenue stream coming in that covers the cost and at least the debt and the debt servicing, basically. That is the one measure in banks that is looked at the most when it comes to project financing. So to achieve that, again, you probably can have different balances around the parameters actually resulting in such a analysis and financial model. But overall, that is actually what the project needs to show and needs to be able to achieve. Which lever is bigger than the other. That is, as I said in my slides, I mean, each project is really kind of an individual project and should be analyzed and structured individually.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Could have thought about that before, but I thought I could give it a try. Maybe you have the one silver bullet in your pocket, but
unfortunately, I don't have it yet.
Okay, but thank you very much, and hopefully we will all see many of those projects being realized and all the risks and challenges overcome within the next years. With that, thanks again for all the speakers for the very insightful presentations. To you, the participants, to staying, although we are 5 minutes over time. And just one final word on the next webinar. So please join us again also next week, where we'll think about other financing mechanisms or other options to overcome the challenges that are not yet implemented. So with that, thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the evening, enjoy the day, and hopefully see you again soon.